Chapter 7. Counting Soldiers. Taka promised to tell Numa of the opals in the morning, then entertain Mora and Kitten with tales of the divine realms. Dane put out the food and made sure Mora knew how to cook it. She was impressed by the girl's camp lore. Few 10-year-olds could build a fire, let alone cook on it. Mora gave the huntsman Tate the credit. "You're lucky in your friends," Dane said as she tucked Mora in. "If not my family," agreed Mora, yawning. "The wolves really won't eat me?" Dane took a breath and counted to 10, so she wouldn't give an angry reply. It worked, simply because Mora was asleep by the time she finished counting. "I leave to go south at dawn," she told Kitten, Taka, and Cloud later. Taka switched to thought speech, confiding that so much spoken talk that day had made his jaw muscles ache. "Have you decided how you will go in?" "I'll see who's about," replied Dane. "Oh, listen, the pack's coming." "We must take your word for that," remarked the basilisk, amused. "In this, your magic is more powerful than ours." Kitten nodded. Dane went to the cave entrance to greet the wolves. The moment she saw them, she wished she had remained seated. Brokefang, in the lead, bore a ham in his jaws. Frostfur was next with a rope of sausages. Each wolf had something: small bags of grain, meat, sacks of potatoes. Each pup proudly and gently bore an egg in his or her mouth. Also, enthroned on Sharpnose's back, nagging the wolf to trot slower, was the squirrel she had healed 2 days ago. Brokefang put the ham at her feet as the rest of the pack carried their burdens into the cave. "The squirrel asked to come," the chief wolf told Dane, panting happily. "He wants to help." "Help with what?" Dane whisper screamed. Taka, Kitten, and Cloud came to see why she was so excited. "Are you crazy? Why did you steal all this food? Where did you steal it? By those above, how did you steal it?" "Easily," Battle replied. "We visited the tree cutter den. They had more food than they could use. We ate some ourselves, and we spoiled the rest." Frolic added, "We knew you and the human pup would soon eat all you have. Besides, if the men have no food, they will not have the strength to cut trees." "I told you the Coldfang was set on your trail because you stole the axes. It'll be a lot easier to track you when you stole hams and onions. They smell." "If they follow, we are ready," said Brokefang coolly. "There is a rockfall up the slope. When pushed, it will bury a Coldfang, and we can use other ways out of the cave." "It will do no good to moan, 'Oh, what have I done?' as you have been. Only Frostfur can be that charming," thought Dane. "It is time for us to think this way. Men bully us all our lives. It is time for some revenge." "Only a little," Brokefang cautioned. "Avoiding two-leggers is still best." "What of you?" Dane asked the squirrel, knowing there was nothing she could say to change the wolves' minds. "How did you get pulled into this madness?" "You told me to listen to non-wolves," Brokefang reminded her. "Surely listening means speaking, too." "The big fellow here told me they fight tree cutters," the little rodent said. "If anyone fights them, I will help. Do you know how many of my kind lost homes and feeding grounds this year? The High Branch family starved in the growing season because their nesting places were cut down, and the big fellow—" "My name is Brokefang," the wolf said, looking up at the squirrel. "I am Flicker," replied the squirrel. "My family is Round Meadow." "It is useless to get excited," Taka said to Dane, not unkindly. "As you told me, you did not ask them to do this. They thought of it themselves, and perhaps it is not such a bad thing to think." Dane sighed. Taka was right. Also, there was nothing she could say to the pack that she had not said before, clearly with little effect. Instead, she looked at Flicker. Squirrels had nimble forepaws, as good as hands in their way, and quick reflexes. They had keen eyes and ears, and a great deal of curiosity. Flicker was perfect for her needs. "How would you like to go for a walk in the morning?" she asked him. Often during her ride south, Dane cursed the need for secrecy that kept her, Cloud, and Flicker high on the mountainsides, rather than on the road by the lake shore. They stopped often to rest Cloud, although the mare argued that she was not a soft valley pony, to be coddled every step of the way. By the time they reached the woods near the southern fort, the afternoon was half gone. Dane cared for Cloud before taking a seat under an old willow. Its long branches swept the earth, screening her and her friends from view. With the mare to stand guard, she was as safe here as anywhere in Dunlath. Making herself comfortable against the bole of the tree, she asked Flicker, "Ready?" The squirrel finished the nut he was eating and launched himself into the willow's branches. "Ready," he replied. Dane closed her eyes. Before she could draw an entire breath, she was in Flicker's mind. Swiftly they climbed high on the bole, then leaped for the next tree. He seized what looked like a clump of leaves and little more, and fell. Dane opened her eyes and her own body again, shaking. Flicker dropped to the next branch down and scolded. "How are we to do anything if you go away on the easiest jumps? Come back at once and don't be such a baby. I thought you went flying with a bat just the other night." "The bat was flying, not falling and missing his grip," she retorted silently. "I did not miss my grip. That was a controlled drop. Now are you coming?" "Just a moment," Dane replied. Finding her water bottle, she had a drink. "Back so soon?" asked Cloud wickedly. "Very funny. I like to see you leap through trees." "But I don't try. That is why my kind has horse sense, and yours does not." Dane made a face at the mare and settled back against the willow. This time all she did was close her eyes, and she was inside Flicker. "You can trust me," he said as he set out once more. "I've done this all my life." The rest of the trip was a blur. Flicker used jumps as she might use large steps over puddles, whipping his tail for balance, then racing to the next leap. The trees were cut for 100 yards around the fort, but the grass was tall enough to screen a gray squirrel. The fort's long walls were easy to climb. At the top, Dane made Flicker check for guards. The two they saw were distant and not looking their way. She urged him over. He dropped onto the walk and climbed head first to the ground as Dane cringed. "You won't make a good squirrel at this rate," he informed her when they were safely on the ground. They checked the inner enclosure. It was nearly empty. Horses were picketed in front of a low wooden building Dane guessed to be the commander's office. A horseboy dozed near his charges under the single tree allowed to grow inside the wall. He was the only human in view, though they heard others in the buildings. Everything was fairly new, built from raw wood. As well as the mess and command post, she identified a stable, a building that had to be a barracks, and the privy. One other building had only a roof, 3 walls, and a long, low railing. Straw was scattered on the floor. The rail was scarred with what looked like knife cuts. "What's that?" asked Flicker. "It looks strange." "I think it's a stormwing roost. They're the only creatures big enough to need a rail that large to sit on." Flicker's teeth chattered angrily. "If they have their own perches like this, they had no business landing on my branch and almost killing me." "Too right. Now let's try the command post," she suggested. The squirrel raced to the closest building, the stable, and ran up the side. One leap, they were on the roof of the Stormwing Mews. Even the wood between them couldn't keep the reek from Flicker's sensitive nose. He sneezed, then jumped onto the command post roof. Trotting to the edge, he swung down under the eaves and saw a broad window. They climbed in and looked around. On the wall by the door, a large slate was mounted. Written across the top in white chalk was "Duty Roster, Troops." Dane examined it. 30 privates were listed, as well as 3 sergeants, 3 corporals, and a captain, making a total of 37. She counted twice, to be sure, then noticed papers in a stack on the desk. "Let's have a peek at those," she suggested to the squirrel. Flicker jumped onto the desk and picked up documents one at a time for Dane to read. The first 2 were supply orders, the third was not. At its foot was a heavy wax seal that bore an image of a crossed sword and wand, topped by a crown and wrapped in a jagged circle. It was the seal of the Emperor of Carthage. She knew it from histories and official papers Numer had shown her. The writing was bold and easy to read. "The criminal Aram Draper, also known as Numar Salamin, is to be taken alive and transported to Carthage by Stormwings. Try also to capture the young dragon. If this immortal is shipped to us live for inclusion in our menagerie, there will be a reward of 500 gold facts. As to the dragon's handler, she is not required. Kill her." The girl was so absorbed in her reading that she didn't notice something had darkened the window. When a wave of stench reached Flicker's nostrils, he sneezed and turned. Rakosh had landed on the rail outside and was looking in. "Well, a tree rat. I think it's odd, a tree rat going through papers. It's not the kind of thing you little crawlers usually do, is it?" Flicker's tail whipped savagely in anger and fear. "Come here," he cried. "I'll show you what a crawler can do." Rakosh slid until he could block out the window if he raised his wings. "Only magic would let a tree rat read," he yelled. "Humans to the command post! Now, ground pounders, now!" Raising a claw, he pointed at Flicker. "The floor!" Dane ordered. Flicker jumped as gold fire smacked into the spot where they had just been standing. "What was that?" asked the squirrel, breath coming fast. "Magic. They don't use it much, but when they do—" "Jump!" Flicker leaped atop a cabinet as another firebolt struck his last position. "I'm getting angry, Smelly," he scolded. "How would you like your nose bit off?" "This is not the time to insult him," Dane warned, looking for an escape. She heard feet pounding. Humans were answering Rakosh's summons. Their location had the Stormwing in a bind. His feathers got in the way as he tried to aim. "What's wrong?" taunted Flicker. "Can't work yourself around to point? Well, one of you was limber enough when it came to landing on me." Someone banged on the door. "Hello? Is anyone there?" "Yes, you dolts!" snarled Rakosh. "Get in here now!" "It's locked!" yelled the man outside. "Out of the way!" the immortal cried. He could point at the door, and did, to loose a bolt of fire at the lock. Flicker jumped to the floor and ran over just as the door swung open. 3 men, 2 of them cooks to judge from their aprons, dashed in. "Get that squirrel!" shrieked Rakosh as Flicker bolted past. The cooks gaped at him. "Get the what?" The exit was open. Flicker darted through and raced for the fort's walls. "Don't argue with me! It's getting away!" Rakosh's voice was clear even through the command post walls. The squirrel didn't even pause. By the time a search party could leave the fort, he had reached the woods and was scrambling through the trees. Dane returned to herself. She tried to get up, but something was not right with her feet or hands. They were squirrel paws. "Oh no," she whispered. "Not now." Looking up, she said, "Flicker, are you all right?" The squirrel climbed down the willow. "You should have let me bite the great stinky," he snapped. "Then he'd know what it's like." Looking her over, he remarked in a milder voice, "You know, parts of you are almost normal." "Funny," mumbled Dane. "Cloud, we have to go. I think Rakosh will search for us, but—" She looked at her hands and feet. They were still paws. "Please change back," she said wistfully. "Why?" asked the squirrel. "You don't have claws of your own. Keep these." "If they are hunting you, it might be wise to warn the local squirrels," Cloud remarked. "They'll just kill anyone they see, hoping it's you." Dane winced. "You're right." She called to the nearby tree folk, whether they were red, gray, or the shy black breed. When she finished, all were finding places to hide, and her hands were human. Teetering on human-sized clawed feet supported by her boots, she saddled Cloud and mounted, with Flicker on her lap. They halted some hours south of the western pass when the light had gone. Stormwings had forced them under cover several times on the way. She dared not start a fire they might see. Instead, she gnawed on whey bread and jerky, trying to ignore a pounding headache. To complete her happiness, fog rose from the lake to cover the valley in a clammy shroud. Flicker cleaned out her supply of sunflower seeds, dug up and ate all the nuts other squirrels had cached within sight of their camp, and curled up in one of Dane's packs to sleep. Dane shoved herself under a rock ledge to get out of the damp, and gingerly removed her boots. Her ankles looked human, but the rest still looked squirrelish. "When will I get my toes back?" she asked Cloud. The mare liked Fog no better than her rider. "I am a pony," she snapped. "You have to ask that question of someone who understands magic. I do not." "So," Dane jumped and banged her head on the rock above her. How the badger had crept up on her she could not begin to guess. "I see you have learned the wider applications of the lesson I mentioned to you." "You could have warned me," she snapped, rubbing her scalp. "I thought I was losing my mind." "After the man said there was no madness in you? If you cannot trust your own instincts, you could at least trust his." "He has no instincts, only things learned from books," she grumbled. "Why do you say that?" The question brought her to a sudden boil. "He walked us into a mess of traitors." She knew she was being unfair, but couldn't stop. "And evil mages. He got stuck on one side of a magic wall, with me on the other. He won't use a word of power on it, 'cause the word might cause a mess somewhere, which I don't believe it will. Now I have to count soldiers at opposite ends of the valley. He thinks I'm safe because I'm inside Flicker. He didn't think of folk who'd see a squirrel looking at papers and know something was amiss. Her toes hurt, sending darts of pain up her legs that did nothing to help her thinking. She rubbed them. I'm saddled with a two-legger who won't go home when she's only in the way. I'm running from Stormwings, Huroks, Coldfangs, and Horse Lords know what else. I'm cold and hungry and tired, and I have squirrel feet. The badger breathed on the afflicted parts. His breath was warm and soothing. Hair and claws melted, turned pale and smooth. Dane's toes were back. They cramped and she winced. The badger breathed on them again. The cramps eased and stopped. So did her headache. You have been a foolish kit, he informed her. To return to your original state, you must do the same thing you do to begin the change, only in reverse. You have to think yourself into your two-legger form. Oh. She drew on stockings and boots, feeling ridiculous. The badger sighed and lay beside her. The weight and warmth of his furred body against hers was pleasant, and the heavy badger aroma was comforting. No matter what I say, the wolves are doing terrible things. Things that will get them hurt if they're caught. How can I help when they won't listen to me? You don't grasp why you were brought here. Haven't you seen in your travels that you alone speak to all three kindreds? Humans, immortals, and beasts? No. Is that important? In other places, perhaps not. But here... What do you think of this valley? He asked, appearing to change the subject. She blinked. Dunlath? He nodded regally. Well, it's nice. Lots of farmland, the lake for fishing, good forests. Or they would be if Yolaine and Belden didn't rip the covering off to get at every drop of what's under it. Except for mountain winters, Dunlath is almost perfect, not only for the people, but two-leggers. She remembered the ogre falling at the mines, blood rolling down his back. Maybe even immortals too, if they wanted to just live here and raise families. Now you see the shape of our plan. You were brought here to help all of Dunlath, not just wolves. That's twice you've said I was brought, like a cat in a sack. The wolves asked me to come help, but I came on my own 2 feet, and on Cloud's 4. Were you not surprised to get a request for help from Brogefang? Is it the nature of wolves to think to ask for help? Well, no. Maybe. They do not ask their kinfolk. Packmates already know what is needed. All those beings who are not pack are unimportant unless they serve as food. But he changed because he licked my wound. He didn't change that much. Not in the beginning. Well then, why did he think to ask for me to come? Old White suggested it. We thought that if you came for the wolves, you would ease into the true matter, the problem of all Dunlath. I had hoped you would see for yourself what is required by now. Dane blushed, feeling absurdly guilty and stupid. I'm not a seer or a diviner, she protested. I need things spelled out. That isn't a crime. The badger rumbled. Then here is the spelling. Fish, fowl, 4-leggers, 2-leggers, no-leggers. You are to set this whole valley to rights. She listened with dismay. How? She wailed. I'm 14. Only 14. How do I set everyone to rights? Get someone bigger. Get someone older. Someone older and bigger will not do. His voice was tightly patient. You are the only one for the task. If you weren't tired and wet and frightened, you would see it for yourself. No, I wouldn't, she muttered rebelliously. I still don't. Shape a bridge between kindreds. He pressed his blunt head to her palm. Find allies, my kit, not just among the people, but among humans and immortals. Idly he added, How do you deal with the Stormwings, may I ask? She made a face. We've had words. You know how they are. They're here in force, and it looks like they're serving the Carthage Emperor once again. It may be they have no choice. If Huroks can be bound to the service of humans, so can Stormwings. Why is everyone I meet defending them? You sound like Mora. Remembering her friend's behavior with the Immortals, Dane snorted. Well, I'll tell you, yesterday I almost felt sorry for Rakosh and his crew. He wanted Mora to go home as bad as I do, but she said no and he wouldn't make her. It was funny. They sound almost like real people, not monsters. The badger's voice was so bland, so clean of any emotion, that Dane looked at him suspiciously. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, young kit. Rising, he nudged her in the side, hard. Get some rest, then go to work. Unless you want to be here for the big cold. Goddess, no. Smiling, she added, Thanks, Badger. Stop feeling sorry for yourself, mind. My patience has its limits. As if to prove his point, he glared at the wide-eyed Flicker, who had listened to the entire conversation. What are you staring at, Nibbler? He didn't wait for a reply. Silver fire bloomed around him and he was gone. Badgers, Flicker remarked wearily. They always have to be wiser and grumpier than anyone else. The next day dawned gray and wet, a mixed blessing. It meant they didn't need to worry much about Hurarks or Stormwings. They had trouble staying aloft with damp wings. However, she and her friends were also wet, which did nothing for moods. They were all aware of the long trip to the northern fort. At least we can dry off and get some hot food here, Dane told the others as they reached the caves. We can't stay long, though. When they entered the big cave, Mora squeaked and ran to hug Dane. I'm so glad you're back, she whispered. Are you done with your counting? Dane felt a guilty twinge. Her comments to the badger about a two-legger who got in her way felt as if they were branded on her forehead. I have to do the northern fort yet, she said. How is everything here? Mora pulled away. Fine, she said, the tone of her voice falsely bright. Taka's teaching me and Kitten and me, Dane corrected automatically. About rocks. You know how you can tell what's what? He teaches Kitten how to change them too, but I can't make the noise. Some of the wolves frighten her, said Taka, emerging from one of the rear caverns. Dane looked for the pack. The pups, napping beside the pile of human gear, thumped their tails and dozed off again. The gray and white female, Frostfur. The older male, Longwind. They do not harm her, but they watch her, and she knows it. The female growls if Mora comes too close. Oh dear. Dane looked at the girl. Taka says Frostfur and Longwind are upsetting you. Oh, no. Mora's eyes avoided Dane's. I hardly noticed them. Fleetfoot and Russet are nice, and the pups will play with me. Would you like corn cakes? I still have some batter. I made it from the food the pack brought. Dane tended Cloud, feeding her the last barley and oats. Her pony cared for her, she tried the cakes and praised them. Flicker liked them too, particularly with honey. It will be a shame to go back to the trees, he confided to Dane. I like the variety of food you have. You'll get fat as a marmot, Dane said, oiling rough spots on Kitten's hide. Dane, Mora asked, I was thinking, don't you need help with your counting? I could write numbers down for you. I wouldn't be in the way. Dismay warred with pity. We've only one horse, Dane said, and I have to move fast. The only way you could go would be if we had a mount for both of us. I can't call your horse. He's in his own stable by now, and there's nothing else you can ride. A deer, maybe? Or an elk? No, I guess that's a stupid idea. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bother you. I know you'd rather I went home. Dane winced. It was what she thought, but hearing it in that polite, well-bred voice made her feel like a bigger monster than a Stormwing. If travel is the only problem, I may be able to help, Taka remarked. I will carry Lady Mora on my back. Kitten whistled. The basilisk nodded. You may ride in my pouch, Skysong. Dumbfounded, Dane stared at the tall immortal. He looked no stronger than a birch sapling. Impossible. You of all people should know better than to use that word, reproved Taka. Even if you could carry both, which I doubt, you couldn't keep up. I do not see how so young a mortal came to believe she knows all there is to be known of immortals. I would not offer if I felt I could not do it. Dane was a well-mannered girl, but she liked being talked down to no better than any other teenager. Very well, she said, standing. If you can fit Kitten in your pouch, carry Mora piggyback, and keep up with me and Cloud. Cloud and me, Mora interrupted. She blushed and covered her mouth with her hands when Dane made a face at her. Then you're welcome to come, the older girl finished, feeling beset on all sides. But if you fall behind, I won't linger for you. Before they had been on the trail more than an hour, Taka caught up to Cloud, Dane, and Flicker and passed them. Mora drooped over his shoulder, sound asleep. Kitten sat up in his pouch, watching the trail. They traveled all day, getting soaked as the damp turned to rain. At mid-afternoon they passed the cliff where Dane had first seen the mines. She sighed. That spot would have been good to work from if she only had to listen to the fort's animals, but she wanted to be closer before Flicker went there. She wasn't sure how far her new magic would stretch. So they followed the mountains farther north, around the fields of heaped and barren dirt. Taka found a wooded ridge that overlooked the fort. It was ideal. Large trees nearby would shelter them from the Huroks Dane was sure lived in the northern fort. Also, a line of rock formed a clear path from the base of their ridge to within 50 yards of the palisade. Flicker agreed. Easy as eating corn, he told her. Using branches and a fallen log over a pocket in the earth, Dane and Mora built a rough shelter where Taka, Kitten, and the girl could sit out of the wet. Dane unsaddled Cloud. As she did so, Mora, Kitten, and Taka returned to the ridge, looking not at the fort but at the mines. The weather might have been damp and miserable, but operations below were in full swing. Human and ogre workers labored in thick mud while overseers cursed those who fell. When Dane joined them, Mora said quietly, "These poor ogres are ugly." "I don't know," replied Dane. "At least they're of a piece, all one thing. They probably think we're funny-looking, all pink and hairless." "You don't hate them? But I hear so many stories. Outside the valley they fight with humans all the time. It's said the king's champion lives in the saddle these days because she's always battling them." Dane shrugged. "It's not so bad. Lady Alana doesn't always fight them. Ogres just don't understand they can't take things that belong to others." Since her talk with the badger, she had done a great deal of thinking. "I wonder, if humans didn't attack or tried to be nice, maybe ogres wouldn't be so nasty." She pointed at the mines. "And I know one thing for certain. This is just plain wrong. Look at their ribs. You could count them. When do you suppose they had their last meal? And whatever it was, it can't have been much." Mora stared at the scene below, small face unreadable. "Come on," Flicker said. "We'll have to do some of this in the dark, and I hate the dark. Can we get moving before we have to do it all in the dark?" "I have to go," Dane told the others. "Keep your heads down while you're here, and get under cover soon. No fire, mind, and talk softly." Taka looked at her. "We will be fine. I will keep the little ones safe." Dane smiled. "I know you will." Seated in a corner of the shelter, Dane shut her eyes and entered Flicker's mind. The squirrel's hide itched with anxiety over the coming of night. He scratched, then clambered down the ridge of the line of rock. The mine workers were trudging home as Flicker reached the fort. Dane was glad to find a chink where the log palisade met the ground. She had not liked the idea of climbing up when they could be seen by those being herded past. Once inside the wall, Flicker scaled one of the watchtowers, tucking himself in where two of the supports met the platform floor. "What is that building over there, the newish one?" he wanted to know. "It has a terrible smell." She peered at the structure he meant. It was set apart from the other buildings in the enclosure. Built like a stable, its doors extended from ground to roof. When the wind blew from its direction, a scent of hay, dead meat, and rage, one she had first smelled as a bat, filled the air. "Hurok stables," she told Flicker. "They patrol this part of the valley. They're nasty. Lucky for us, I don't think they can fly in weather like this." She examined the rest of the fort. It was larger than the one in the south, and older. No doubt it had been here before the mining began. There were painted shutters open on the building's windows. The men wore the uniform of Mora's house, green tunic over grey shirt and breeches, with a shoulder badge of the Dunlath coat of arms, a green two-headed griffin on a grey field. "Stands to reason that it's fancier," she told Flicker. "Most local visitors must come from the north, from the city of the gods or Fee Vaili. Only traders come in from the south." "The sun is going," the squirrel replied. "I'm afraid we have to let it go," she said as kindly as possible. "The room with the light in it looks to be the commander's office like the one we visited in the south. We have to wait for him to leave, and that probably won't be till it's time to eat. Look at it this way, at least we're out of the rain." "We're going back to our friends in the dark?" asked Flicker. "We must." He sighed. "I know you wouldn't ask it of me if it weren't important. I just hate the dark." The meager daylight was gone, and torches were lit when the mess call was sounded. The lamp in the commander's office continued to burn, but the commander emerged to join the flow of men to the mess. Dane and Flicker waited until everyone but the guards in the tower had left the yard, then raced to the headquarters. Swiftly they climbed in the window through an open shutter. Like its counterpart, this fort had slates with the duty roster nicely laid out in wide chalk. "I love soldiers," Dane confided to Flicker. "They always try to do things the same as every other soldier." She read what was on the board, counting 40 soldiers, 4 corporals, 4 sergeants, and 1 captain. "More soldiers because of the two-leggers entering this way?" asked Flicker. "Has to be," she replied. "Come on, let's get out of here." The return took longer than the trip out. Flicker was almost as blind in the dark as a human, and more nervous than Dane had ever seen him. Each rustle and squeak was an owl, a bear, a bush dog, or something worse come to eat him. Dane nursed him along as patiently as she knew how. Flicker had done great things for her, things no squirrel would dream of, and that knowledge kept her gentle when he made one of his many stops to hide. She stayed with him up the face of the ridge and over its edge, rather than leaving him to do it alone. He nearly expired when a huge shadow moved and snorted. "Hello, squirrel," said Cloud. "Bad night?" Flicker sat down against a tree bole, shuddering. "It was terrible," he told the pony. "How can you stand walking in the dark?" Dane knew Cloud would ease the squirrel's shattered nerves if the two were alone, so she thanked Flicker again and left him to open her eyes in the shelter. There was no light anywhere, only noises, the sounds of large bodies moving nearby. Nervous, she looked around, ears twitching. Now she could see a little, but what she saw was not reassuring. 2 monstrous shapes moved just outside the shelter's door, one tall and thin, the other wide across the shoulders and slumped. Between them was a smaller, but still big, shape. A whistle by one of her ears nearly deafened her, and a face thrust itself near hers. It was long and sharp-toothed on the end. Large, faintly glowing eyes with cat-like pupils looked her over. She squeaked and tried to back away. The smaller of the big shapes turned, showing a face like a pale blur in the darkness. Its owner crawled toward Dane on hands and knees. It was very strange to find Morris so much bigger than she was. "Oh dear," the girl said. Dane, you shrank." "Tell me something I don't know," Dane said. It came out as angry squirrel chatter. She looked at her hands and feet. They were still human, but a fine gray fuzz covered them, and the tips of her nails were now black claws. She closed her eyes and tried to remember who Dane the human was. It was easier to remember her wolf self or her bat self. Who was she? An image appeared before her eyes, a pool of copper fire with a central core of white light. Between core and pool lay a wall of clear power, like glass, flickering with sparks of white and black fire. The white core was her inner self. The sparkling wall was the barrier Numer once put between herself and her magic, to stop her from forgetting her humanity. Start there, she thought. She found memories of Ma, of Grandad, of the house where she grew up. Next were the Snows-Dale humans who tried to kill her for running with wolves. She saw Anua, who gave her work in Gala and a home in Tortle. Here were others who filled important places in her life, a mixed bag of nobles, commoners, warriors, and animals. So that's who I am, she thought, pleased to have so much that was good in her human life. She opened her eyes.